Thank you for coming to this Denver chapter speaker series. As a reminder, our mission is to support 100% renewable Colorado through education, engagement, and connection to networking opportunities across all Denver communities. We are a statewide nonpartisan nonprofit 501c3 membership organization. So I will go through some chapter announcements and introduce our speaker, Dr. Prantik Saha, and then he will go ahead and do our feature presentation for the evening. As a reminder, you can find out more at our website at creds.energy.org. It's also where you can become a member. If you have feedback, we want to hear it at this email. It is monitored regularly, so feel free to send your notes, send your questions. And to all of that, we love your support. You can definitely donate online or at Venmo or use your Amazon Smile account. All donations help us keep events like this and others going. We're now going to get a quick policy update from one of our members, David.
Yeah, good evening to y'all. Some big things, but we're going to keep this pretty short because we want to get onto the program. Quietly, we had something happen a few months ago where it looked like it was possible that something like 83% of all the solar panels would be prevented from being used in this country. I'm not going to go into the details. The Biden administration has basically done a little maneuver to delay that for a couple of years. This has to do with using panels built in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, places like that. So that's good news for the solar industry, because this was going to essentially put a damper on the entire, virtually all the projects in the US. Next slide, there we go.
Oh,
that's okay, yes, here we go. And of course, the big news is the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA Act passed. This is the single biggest climate investment in U.S. history by a significant margin. So a lot of money being spent to further renewable energy in all sorts of different ways, including some nice things for individuals, you know, for consumer home energy rebates, not unlike, for example, the Denver Climate Action Rebate. So some additional things, if you're putting solar up in 2022, you get a 30% tax break again, which is nice. So all sorts of good stuff there. Next slide. Speaking of Denver Climate Action Rebates, this program is a flying success. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, go check out the link at denvergov.org, home energy. This is money back for heat pumps, solar PV, battery storage, you know, all sorts of things. The heat pump rebate, they paused it at the end of June, but they're promising that it will come back here in the fall here shortly. The most, I don't know, the part of the program that's gotten the most attention is the electric bike program, the e-bike program, which has been a fabulous success. And they keep running out of money, which is a sign of a good thing. But because the bucket of money is being replenished by sales tax revenue, the bucket replenishes over time. So if you would like an e-bike rebate, that's $500 by the way, if you're non-income qualified, and over $1,000 if you are income qualified. Check back. Essentially at the beginning of each month, they turn the program on. Here's your factoid of the day. In August, when they turned the program on, they ran out of money in the first 24 minutes for the non-income qualified rebates for the e-bikes. Anyway, this is a very popular program. We're seeing a lot of people adopting it, people getting out on bikes who wouldn't normally be on bikes. So good stuff. And Liya, I'm all done.
All right, thank you so much for that update. Next speaker series will be with the one and only Jonathan Rogers and some colleagues to give us a general policy update. So if you enjoyed David's updates that you just heard and want to hear more, come back next month, September 15th, 7 p.m. Most likely we'll be here online, but keep an eye out on the meetup website for any changes to that. And as always, please RSVP on our meetups for these events, just so we know who's coming along. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Prantik Saha, who's going to speak about a new carbon capture strategy for heavy industry.
So hello, everyone. I'm Prantik. I'm a postdoc at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. I've been working here for slightly more than a year now. And I am very, very thankful to the Colorado Renewable Energy Society, the Metro Denver chapter, for giving me an opportunity to present a very new technology, what we have been working on. We are very passionate about it. We are excited about it. And we think that it is going to be very, very important in the whole decarbonization game. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So without wasting much time, because we don't have much time today, let's jump into the presentation. So this presentation is going to be I made it so that it's not too technical. It's not supposed to be too fast. It's going to be actually pretty laid back, so that I want the audience to get the central message of what I'm presenting. So it will be a slow-paced seminar, not too much technical data. If you want more technical description, you can ask me the questions. You can reach out to me later, and I'll be more than happy to give you the technical answers. But basically, I'm going to tell you about the new technology, right? And more importantly, I'm going to tell you how this new technology fits into the bigger picture. You see, this is very important because there are different ways you can present about a new technology, right? You can just go on talking about the technology itself, right? Because technologies are deep, there has many legs and hands. So you can just keep on going, keep on just talking about themselves. But what I'll try to do is that I'll give the technical description a little bit, but more importantly, I'll try to teach how it fits in, where exactly it fits in the decarbonization game, so that you can have the bigger picture in mind. And there is another bit of experiment in this presentation today, is that I have a few subsections in this presentation, and after every subsection, I'll actually pause so that you can actually ask me questions. I designed this way after talking to Ryan, because sometimes if the presentations are so long, we sometimes lose interest or lose concentration. So that this is done so that you can keep concentration and you can ask questions to me. I think you can write the questions in the chat box and they'll be read to me afterwards. Either way, I'm fine either way. Okay, so this is the way the presentation is going to be. So there will be two or three slides per section. First, I'm going to start with introducing myself very briefly, where I'm from, probably 1 or 2 slides max. And then I'll just tell briefly about the bigger problem of global warming and how decarbonization was posed as a solution, but it cannot be the only solution. It's just, let's say, the first step towards a solution. Then I'll talk a little bit about the overall picture of the decarbonized economy, so that when I show you the new technology later, you can somehow relate how it will fit into the bigger picture. And then I'll talk about the different carbon capture technologies. So the talk is about one particular type of carbon capture technologies. I think you probably have heard about this technology in general, the carbon capture technologies, but not this particular one. And then after introducing different carbon capture technologies, I'll go to the electrochemical carbon capture technology, the one what we have been working on and I'm going to present today. And then I'll talk about the economics of it, so that you know where it stands at present, like is it at the lab scale or we are going to see it within the next 2 years. And then I'll just introduce a few companies and the startups that are in the game, and then I'll end the talk. So that will be the talk itself. Okay, so first, a brief introduction about myself. So as you probably guessed from my accent, I'm not from US. So I'm from this land called Bengal. it's not exactly a country, it's a linguistic region. So for example, if this is the map of South Asia, more or less, starting from basically Afghanistan in the northwest to end of Myanmar in the southeast. And the Bengal is basically there. So it's basically a region where people speak a language called Bengali or Bangla. Now, it consists of the country Bangladesh, a few states in India, a few portions in the country Bhutan, a few portions in the country Nepal, and also some areas of Myanmar. So you see, it's a little complex geography. Imagine it's something like English is spoken in US, also in Canada as well. So something like that, but a little bit more complex. Now, if you look at the location of it on the Earth, then you can probably guess some aspects of the climate in the region. First of all, the 23.5-degree line, the Tropic of Cancer, passes over this region. And it's very, very close to the sea level. And it's one of the most danger-prone areas from the perspective of global warming. So, and when I grew up, I saw a lot of floods, cyclones. It's basically what you can see somewhere in Florida or something, but even like in more, because the Indian Ocean that surrounds it is very, very active. So it's a very danger-prone region. And in fact, the whole of Southeast Asia is like Thailand, Laos, Maldives, all of these areas are actually very dangerous. Now, a fun fact is that there are actually a lot of Bengali. Oh, so I actually grew up I was born in this southern part of Bangladesh, and I grew up mostly in India in two major cities, which I'll show later. But a fun fact is there are actually a lot of Bengalis living in US. And the biggest population is in New York, specifically in Queens and Bronx. And approximately like 210,000 Bengalis live in USA, which is a high number. All right, so now I'm going to show you a brief journey. So I was born in a district called Noakhali in Bangladesh, which is a very small village in the southern part of Bengal, almost on the Bay of Bengal. It's probably like the Bay of Bengal was probably like less than 50 miles from where I grew up actually. And then I grew up in a city called Kolkata, or the British used to call it Calcutta in India. And then I came to US for my PhD. So initially I was at Tufts University, which is in Boston, Massachusetts, or Cambridge actually, closer, in Massachusetts. And then after halfway there, we came to University of California, Irvine. So from the East Coast to the West Coast. And in University of California, generally, it's a little bit better for the research perspective. There's a lot of research funding, so the labs are more available, and you can collaborate with other universities in the area too. So it's kind of like convenient to have your career there. And after I finished my PhD, I joined NREL in the Chemistry and Nanoscience Center, working on the thing what I'm going to present you today. All right, so let me go to the next section, which is global warming and decarbonization as a solution. So I'd like to start this section actually by showing respect to NASA. In the last 2 years, they have done a wonderful job in kind of putting a visual representation of the global warming data worldwide. And this is very important. It's open source. You guys can go and see, for example, how the temperature distribution along the ocean surface and on the lands vary. So for example, if you see these two pictures, these are the temperature map from of the Earth of 1900 and 2020. So about like 120 years apart. Now, the first thing you have to understand is that this temperature map, there is no one did an experiment to measure the temperature, right? This is all simulation. And the simulation goes backward. So right now we know how the temperature plot is around the world. If we know the temperature today, then you can simulate back based on some conditions, and you know what the temperature was, let's say, in 1900s. It's all simulation. Now the white area means it's exactly at the average temperature of the Earth at that time. And then the bluer it is like colder. And the redder it is hotter, right? It's kind of understandable. Now you see in 2020, it's like most of the areas are actually hotter than the global average, which is very, very disturbing. And it's more red if you see close towards the North Pole, because it's an interesting fact, even though most of the pollutions are not coming from the North Pole, they actually end up going there because of the rotational motion of the Earth itself. So it's kind of very interesting. So that's why the polar melting, ice cap meltings, all those things are happening. And you can also see, for example, how the average temperature varied with the respect of time. So for example, 1880, which was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the temperature more or less rose by 1.5 degrees Celsius. And that's that 1.5 degrees Celsius pledge we talk about from the Kyoto Protocol or the Paris Accords. Now, I'd also like to just briefly mention that you probably know that Nobel Prize in Physics in 2021 was given to Suki Manabe and Klaus Hasselmann they are the reasons why we understand how, for example, carbon dioxide increases the global temperature or the greenhouse gases in general. Suki did it for the Earth atmosphere, and Klaus did it for the oceans, how the ocean temperature is rising and the stuff like that. Now, so what is the solution to mitigate the effect of global warming? Well, the first thing is that we thought that, okay, so we'll decarbonize our system completely. So it's kind of blocking my way, I'm sorry. So decarbonize the system. Now, what it basically means, we all know, is that replace all the technologies that emit CO2 by technologies that do not emit CO2, the so-called clean technologies. So for example, replace the gas power plants or coal-powered power plants by solar panels or wind turbines, like the clean technologies. In transportation too, we are replacing them mostly with the battery electric vehicles, or for long distance transformation, we're thinking about the fuel cell vehicles, right? So this is a general perception about the decarbonization. Now, there is one missing piece to it, and that is going to be the topic of today's lecture, and I'll go there shortly, but there is one missing piece in this picture of decarbonization. Now, another thing I want to show you is that decarbonization itself, or let's say decarbonization itself, is not enough. For example, methane is a very stronger greenhouse gas, meaning that it can increase the Earth's temperature faster than carbon dioxide. The only reason we are not too worried about the methane emission right now is because there is not as much methane emission of CO2. But soon we handle the case of CO2, we'll probably go to methane and other greenhouse gases as well. So the solution to climate crisis does not stop at decarbonization. It's way more than that. Decarbonization is just probably the first step. All right. Okay. Great. So I'll go to the next section, which is overall picture of the decarbonized economy. So okay. So what do I mean by the overall picture? It's kind of you can imagine how the energy ecosystem works. That's what I mean by the overall picture. So for example, it starts with power generation. Like right now, for example, most of the power, electrical power, comes from the fossil fuel sources. Either it's oil or not oil, this is not that much. Either coal, mostly all over the world. Globally, it's coal. In the US, it's gas. And there are probably other sources, fossil fuel-based sources as well. But the first thing about decarbonized economy is that we have to clean up the power generation sector. So for example, we have solar panels, solar energy, wind energy, hydroelectricity, nuclear as well. Now there is about the nuclear, people are kind of divided. Nuclear is very clean in a sense that it does not pollute the environment as much from the CO2 perspective. No greenhouse gas emission in general. The problem with nuclear is that when something goes wrong, it is really bad. Like think about Chernobyl or Fukushima or stuff like that. Also, dumping nuclear waste is a difficult thing. And so you have to be really careful about that. But it turns out that actually, if we really want to decarbonize, our recent reports from International Energy Agency, for example, it actually indicates that we need to have a fair share of nuclear to become decarbonized within the next 20-30 years. So it's very important. Now, there are two now among all these clean power generation sources. There is actually a difference. For example, hydroelectricity is kind of eternal. It gives you a steady flow of steady generation of power almost all throughout the year, depending on the river situation. It is just that it can create some environmental impact. Sometimes people don't care about it. So, where on the other hand, for example, solar and wind, they're intermittent, right? Like you don't get solar at night. Wind, sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't get it, and the power fluctuates a lot. So it's intermittent. So people have to, so we have to care these, or you have to use these different power sources in different ways. Now, another part, because we know that another important part of the decarbonized economy is energy storage, right? Because most of the renewable sources are intermittent. Solar, wind, intermittent. Hydro, yeah, more or less steady, but sometimes you can have some intermittency as well. So we need to store the energy so that we can use them later. For example, lithium-ion energy storage is probably the most sought after solution now for the highest density of energy. We can also have, for example, the thermal storage, where you store it in the molten salt and then you get it back later. For example, this company in Germany is really doing well. We can also have compressed air energy sources. We can also have, for example, redox flow batteries. So there are a lot of things, but energy storage is an important part of the decarbonized energy chain. Another important thing is the green fuels, right? And I'm going to explain it more in the next slide. But right now, you know that right now the main fuel in the energy ecosystem is the petroleum products, right? But this has to be changed. So we are thinking about hydrogen, green ammonia. We started looking at ammonia recently, probably like 3 years ago. And in the last few months, I'd say a new player actually emerged in this field, and this is the dimethyl ether. I won't talk about these things in detail, but I just wanted to let you know that we are basically playing with the different options we have now for the clean fuels. Now, this is all well known. Now, there is another piece in the puzzle that is very, very important for the decarbonization, and I'll explain again how exactly, and that's the carbon capture. And the basic reason for it is that of the many, of all the heavy industries we have, for example, steel manufacturing, cement manufacturing, ammonia manufacturing, all these industries are actually, they rely on some combustion systems at some like for some stages in the whole process. And as far as we can see the technologies, there in near future, we really don't have a clean replacement for all those technologies. Like there is no way we can produce steel in near future in such a way that there will be no emission of carbon dioxide. So it looks like we have to somehow capture the carbon or carbon dioxide produced in those processes and somehow store them so that that carbon dioxide cannot go there. And that's where carbon capture comes. And there are a number of carbon capture technologies. I'll talk about one of them, but that's later. So I would say in this overall picture of like power generation, energy storage, green fuels, and carbon capture, the whole global picture of decarbonization emerged, I would say, within the last 10 to 12 years at most. And that is kind of, I want to tell people that, you know, go for the, like, try to have the central picture in, bigger picture in mind, and before going into too much details of one particular technology. So now I want to elaborate a little bit on the green fuel part because I think it's very important. So right now, how does it work? So for example, we extract fuel in some place. So for example, it could be an oil in an offshore oil rig, as I'm showing. It could be natural gas from underground. It could also be some minerals, you know, from under the ground. So you extract the fuel using power, using electrical power. Then you transport the fuel. So it could be natural gas pipelines. It could be, you know, shipping. It could be, you could do it for traveling, but there is like a long distance transportation as well. And then at the point of use, we use them. So for example, you go to the gas pump to to get the fuel for your car, or you know, the power plants generate electricity back from the fuel. Now, when we say that we are developing the economy, it means that we are developing the whole of the economy, and we are doing a holistic approach rather than focusing on one particular part of this whole problem. Now, the question is, what is the fuel for the decarbonized world? Because we know that oil, natural gas, these things won't work because they are not clean sources of energy, right? Well, it looks like, and we are fairly confident about it, it is going to be hydrogen in one form or the other. The basic idea is like now, for example, we extract the fuels. Its counterpart in the decarbonized world would be producing green hydrogen, probably by electrolyzing from electrolysis of water. Okay, there could be other processes too, for example, pyrolysis in an inert atmosphere or something, but this is probably going to be the dominant way of producing hydrogen. Now we'll have to do some long distance transportation. Now this part we are not really sure about, and that's why I didn't show any picture of it or something. We have some ideas. We can probably blend up to 20% of hydrogen in the natural gas pipelines and transport them over long distances. We can also do a specially made trucks, or we are also thinking about some specific hydrogen carriers, and that's where actually ammonia comes in. We actually believe now that ammonia, if you convert the hydrogen to ammonia, and you can it's easy to transport ammonia because we already have ammonia pipelines all over the world. So that's just one option. There are many other options as well, but we are not very sure about this part of the picture. So it's a problem. Now, on the user side, this is very important. On the user side, it's probably going to be the fuel cells, because fuel cells actually convert the hydrogen, energy stored in the hydrogen, to electricity. Now you can see the kind of like the mirror image in the petroleum era and the decarbonized era. So the energy production in green hydrogen, storing it in green hydrogen, transporting them, and then using them in fuel cells or something. So this is what I mean by the overall picture of the decarbonized economy. I'll stop it here, and then I'll go into the carbon capture technologies. But is there any question?
We have a question. It was actually about your previous section. I apologize for not catching it then. There was the NASA maps, I think, with the temperature differential. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the question is actually, do the red areas denote range of temperature change in that picture?
Do the red areas what? I'm sorry?
Denote range of temperature change.
Yeah. So in the red area too, there is a variation. So red is actually plus 2 degrees above the average. So the reddest portion is the plus 2 degrees. And when you go from red to yellow, then you're like going down. White means 0 degrees. So it's exactly at the average temperature. Does it make sense? Is it clear now? And the average we are thinking about is the average of the average temperature of the Earth that was before the Industrial Revolution. So reddest part would be 2 degrees above that temperature, average temperature of the Earth before Industrial Revolution happened. All right. So now I'll go into the carbon capture technologies. Okay. So before going to the carbon capture technologies, I'd like to actually pay respect to one person. I don't do that usually. I go with the subjects more than the people. But so this person, Professor Klaus Lackner from Arizona State University, he's actually one of the leading forces behind this move towards considering carbon capture as an essential technology to mitigate the carbon change, to mitigate the climate change. Carbon capture was there even before. Like, as I was saying, the carbon capture is not more than 20 years old. And so the people have been doing carbon capture in some form or the other, right? For example, if you think about it, we make the carbon, how do we make the carbonated water? We take the water and we just dump in the CO2 at high pressure. That's one form of carbon capture. That was not meant to be a way of climate, like a way to mitigate the climate change, but it is one form of carbon capture. So it has been known to people. It's not that the whole of carbon capture idea is new, but Professor Lackner is actually I'd say the main driving force doing all the analysis and showing that, hey, I mean, if we want to reach like net zero or something by 2045 and so on and so forth, we need to actually extract carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It is just not enough to deploy more electric vehicles, batteries, battery storage, hydrogen and stuff like that. You need to extract carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Otherwise, we cannot reach that net zero goal. So I thought that it would be a good place to pay respect to this visionary. And I always respect people's visions because then, you know, it's like you can see in the future. Now, the oldest of the carbon capture technologies, I think you probably well know, it's like dumping CO2 underground. So, for example, the oil and gas companies, when they refine the petroleum, the crude oil, to more refined petroleum products, like for example, you start with the crude oil and then you refine it. You go from diesel, petrol, and then octane, and then gasoline, or maybe gasoline is before and octane is later, and so on and so forth, right? And so at each stage of this refining, you keep emitting carbon dioxide. So what in many areas, the oil and gas companies, they started dumping the CO2 underground. And sometimes it is a fact of nature that CO2 gets absorbed in the solutions where it's salty, the brine water. So they would inject brine water at high pressure inside the ground in the depleted oil or gas reservoirs, and then dump CO2 in there. And that's it. And you don't care about what happens to this dumped CO2. I mean, does it remain absorbed in the aquifer, in the brine solution, or it somehow comes out? Does it increase for example, the acidity of the soil? Does it affect the farming, for example? Because it will surely increase the acidity of the soil, because H2O reacting with CO2 to produce carbonic acid, right? So it should increase the acidity of the soil. But it's more of like it's not a sustainable technology. It's more of like, you know, it's like, well, we don't have any other better way. What can we do? So that's the best we could do in this case. And this has been going on, as far as I know, since 1990s, I think, as far as I can remember. Another old, a little bit newer technology. It has many variant forms, but in its very basic. It's the fact that, for example, when CO2 reacts with an alkaline solution, for example, let's say caustic soda, like potassium hydroxide, then it produces first potassium bicarbonate, and then it produces potassium carbonate. And the reaction rate is pretty high. For example, if you consider how many molecules of carbonates to how many molecules of CO2 will be there, it'll be like almost 10 to the power 10, right? So it's a natural way that happens. So you just, if you have a KOH solution and you start putting in CO2, it will naturally, even at room temperature, it will become carbonate and will be stored there. And this fact, this affinity of KOH or any alkaline solution per se of CO2 has been used to capture carbon in many, many different cases. So basically what a typical design would be, it's a schematic. So for example, you'll have like flue gas, which contains CO2, CO, then there in a chamber, and it'll go through different stages of CO2 absorption, and then you'll get the clean gases out from one end. That has been there since 2020. And Professor Lackner was actually worked on different variations of these technologies. Now, the most exciting one, the newest one, which I'm going to talk about, is an electrochemical technology today. It is basically an electrochemical cell where you put in the CO2, you apply power, and you produce something else. And that's how you capture the CO2 in other molecules. That's the basic idea. I'm going to explain it, so that's not going to be in this slide. It is very new in time. It's actually not older than 8-9 years at most, and it is at the technology readiness level 7. Now, if you don't know what TRL is, a TRL is basically an indicator of, like, is it at the lab scale or it can be deployed. TRL 9 to 10 means that it can be deployed. TRL 7 means that we are basically studying the scaling up of, like, how big we can make this system right now. And we are actually doing it at NREL, at that lab, and this is one of my main projects there. So we're really excited about this technology, so that this can suck up the carbon dioxide from polluting sources, right? Okay, So the next slide is going to be on electrochemical carbon capture. I won't stop here. I'll explain the electrochemical carbon capture and then I'll stop. So an electrochemical carbon capture is basically an electrochemical cell. And what is an electrochemical cell? It's a very simple thing. All of you have seen batteries or something, right? It has an anode, it has an ion conductor or electrolyte, and a cathode. Now what happens is that you apply electrical power to it and you flow CO2 at the cathode. Now CO2 reacting with water and with electrons, it becomes some other molecules, for example, carbon monoxide, and produce hydroxyl ions. And these hydroxyl ions travel through the electrolyte that has good conductivity for hydroxyl ions, go to the anode, and these hydroxyl ions break into water, oxygen, and electrons. And these electrons again travel through the circuit. That's how the whole circuit gets completed. Now, in this way, this is a reduction, and that's sometimes called a carbon dioxide electroreduction. Now, it's electrochemical because you see there is a direct reaction between the carbon dioxide and the electrons you flow. So there is a direct conversion between the electrical power, electrical energy, to the chemical energy, and it gets stored, for example, in this case, carbon monoxide, right? Now, the fascinating thing about this technology is that in this case, the CO2 gets converted to other chemicals, right? So that's why sometimes it's called a CO2 recycler. It's called a CO2 electrolyzer because what happens at the anode is actually water electrolysis. Or sometimes in the popular talks, you will also hear the terms like electrochemical plants because it converts CO2 to some other chemicals like a plant does. So it's also called electrochemical plants. Now, if you use different catalysts, you will produce different things as end products. So for example, if you use silver or gold nanoparticles at the cathode, you produce carbon monoxide. If you use copper or sometimes also iron, you will produce ethylene, from where you can make polyethylene or polythene. If you use tin or bismuth oxide, you can use formic acid. You can make formic acid. And all of these have different use cases. So you use different catalysts, you end up with different end products. I also want to show you about how we fabricate these electrodes because it's very easy and it's also used in different technologies like batteries, fuel cells, electrolyzers, carbon capture. In all these electrochemical devices, the fabrication process is basically the same. Okay. First, you start with these catalyst nanoparticles. Okay. And then you make an ink out of it. It's basically a solution, a thick solution of ink out of it. And then you take some carbon paper that are porous. Okay, there's a reason for why it has to be porous, but you basically take some carbon papers that we use on day-to-day basis. And then you can coat them coat this ink on that carbon paper. And that is basically your electrode, like either your anode or cathode. It's that simple. You can do it at your home as well. It is really, really simple. Another important aspect about this technology is that we use something called ion conducting polymers. And this is very fascinating because this technology is also not more than 30 to 40 years old, I'd say 40 years old. Basically, these are actually plastics, okay? When we think about electrolyte, for example, the electrolyte used in the car batteries, the lead acid battery, it's an H2SO4, a sulfuric acid, it's a liquid. But in most of the electrochemical devices we use now, fuel cells, electrolyzers, carbon capture, also in the new batteries called the solid state batteries, we use these things called ionomer or ion conducting polymers. They are basically plastic, but the difference with the normal plastic is that they conduct ions. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but that's, I think, an amazing discovery because it makes the whole thing very, very thin, very compact, okay? So I'll just stop here because I think it has become fairly technical at this point. Is there any question?
We have one from Tracy. She was looking for clarification. She asked, is basalt alkaline and can it capture carbon dioxide?
Here in this one?
Yes.
Does the salt what?
She asked, is basalt alkaline and can it capture carbon dioxide?
No. Okay, that's a good question. So So if you start, so salt is not a salt solution is not alkaline. Salt solution is usually very neutral. So close to pH 7, around pH 7, the pH of let's say pure water. But the salt solution, not every salt solution. So for example, if you take a solution of, let's say, bicarbonate or carbonate, those salt has a decent absorbing ability of carbon dioxide. So it's not as much as, let's say, a pure alkaline solution like KOH is. For example, for KOH, out of 10 to the power 10 molecules, only one will be CO2, and the rest will be all converted to bicarbonates. For the salt, it's actually way much less, but it's still a decent amount. You see, you cannot put alkaline solution underground because you don't know what it's gonna do to your soil. But a salt solution is fine, it's not as dangerous. So that's why they dump salt solution underground to capture CO2. Let me know if it's clear or.
It was clear. I think you misheard. I had asked about basalt, not salt.
Basalt?
B-A-S-A-L-T.
Well, basalt is a solid object, right?
Yes.
So it is neither alkaline nor neutral. So basalt is a type of rock. It's neither alkaline nor neutral. Yeah. So, okay, so I think I have given you like a very brief idea of what the electrochemical carbon capture is. Now, before going to the next, okay, that now actually tell you the economics of these carbon capture technologies, okay? Now, one thing you have to keep in mind that now we are very excited about the electrochemical technologies in general. And in a brief moment, you'll actually see why. Because these electrochemical systems like fuel cells or electrolyzers or batteries or these electrochemical carbon capture devices, they are very similar. Like if you get trained on the fuel cells, you can actually use many of the knowledges, many of the techniques to actually study electrolyzers and study these carbon capture systems. It's very similar. They have, like, if you understand the basic things very well, you'd be able to you'll be able to work with the many technologies and you can switch companies. Like you can, right now you work at a fuel cell company, after 3 years you can go to a carbon capture company like that, because all the skills you have are very transferable. So that's a very important thing. So I'd actually recommend people to study more about these electrochemical systems as much as they can. Okay, now what's the economics of carbon capture, electrochemical carbon capture technologies? One thing that is very special about these electrochemical systems is that they're very, very compact. For example, this is cell, like schematically that I presented. These are typically less than 1 millimeter thick, very thin. This is actually a real carbon capture cell from my lab itself. The plasticky thing in the middle, that's the ion conductor. That actually conducts the ions. And because these electrochemical devices are very, very compact, that's why you can place them in many, many different areas, because they're very, very compact. They don't take up a lot of volume. Compare it to, for example, the combustion engines. For example, let's say the gas-powered power plants, right? They take up a large volume in that case. So if you try to think about how much power is coming from 1 liter of that machine, electrochemistry wins in those cases. Now, okay, so how have we technically achieved so far? So what I'm showing you is that different chemicals we have produced from this carbon dioxide capture, and how fast, like how much carbon dioxide we can actually capture in that process, and what is the production rate of the chemical we are doing. So for example, if we try to produce formic acid, our analysis tells us that we can actually capture 40 kilograms of carbon dioxide in 1 hour. And that is one standard stack of carbon capture device. Now, if let's say you want to have a company and you can have 10 of those stacks, and then you'll be able to basically capture like 400 kilograms of carbon dioxide in 1 hour for formic acid. And you can produce the formic acid at almost close to 0.8 kilogram in an hour. For carbon monoxide, we actually cannot capture the carbon dioxide. To produce carbon monoxide or ethylene, we cannot capture carbon dioxide as fast. We can go as fast as close to 8 kilograms an hour, and we can produce these quantities at like 1 kilogram an hour, 0.1 kilogram an hour. Again, this is one standard stack, right? Now you can pile up more stacks to capture more carbon dioxide. The more stacks you buy and the more stacks you connect to the carbon dioxide lines, the more you can capture. This is we have achieved so far, and this is actually very, very good, because with this we actually have a cost analysis. And for example, if you look at formic acid, we can, with the present grid scale cost of electricity, we can produce formic acid at like close to 60 cents per kilogram. So we require almost 60 cents to produce 1 kilogram of formic acid. The market production cost of formic acid is 50 cents per kilogram. And the market size is almost 6 billion, because formic acid is used in the food processing industry and also in the drugs manufacturing industry. It's huge, and it's very impressive. You see, we are almost just 10 cents up from the present market price. Now with the carbon monoxide, now here's the thing, it's 44 cents per kilogram of carbon dioxide to make, whereas the market manufacturing price is 80 cents per kilogram. So we are already below the market price, and the market size is 3 billion. With the ethylene from which you make polyethylene or polythene, we are a little bit off. We have to, because of some reasons, we cannot, it's really prices like $2.50 per kilogram, whereas the market price is really, really low. And it has the biggest market share in the whole chemical industry, because you make plastics out of it. So that's why a lot of research effort is actually into the ethylene, to how to actually make it cheaper and cheaper. So the bottom line is that with this new technology, we have already reached the market parity for formic acid and carbon monoxide, meaning that we can actually produce this, we can capture the CO2, of course, save the environment, and of course produce formic acid and carbon monoxide almost at the same rate as the market. Now one has to take care that these are techno-economic analysis, and these are not very robust, right? Like if you see this analysis after 4 years, things may actually change, because the grid's electricity cost may change and stuff. Right now, our principal focus is to actually increase the lifetime of these devices, and this is it has works very well until like we are pretty sure that they can last for about like 500 hours or so, 500 hours of operation. Now, where do we use them? Now, this electrochemical carbon capture is actually useful for the heavy industries, and that's why the title of the talk was a new carbon capture technology for heavy industries. For example, steel plant, cement plant, ammonia plant, they all have those exhaust pipes, right? And for example, also the biorefineries, also it's a big use case for this electrochemical carbon capture. So basically how it works is that you have a plant that has this tailpipe emission of carbon dioxide, right, in a huge amount, like these industries like that. In fact, even gas power plants or coal plants as well. Now, what you do is that you actually make the gas, the exhaust gas, pass through a gas separator, and the technology of the gas separator is already existing, meaning that this is sometimes called a pressure swing absorption or something. Basically, if you are in the technical field, these are basically zeolite rocks, or sometimes activated charcoals, sometimes yttria. There are several things. There are several commercially available solid substances, porous, that can actually absorb, for example, the sulfur oxides or the oxides of nitrogen, and also water vapor. And what comes out of those separators is pure CO2. Now you feed the pure CO2 to the CO2 recyclers that we talked about. This is actually a stack from our lab. I hope no one is taking any screenshot or something, because some of the information may be protected by NDA. But this is actually a CO2 recycler stack from our lab itself. And then so you pass it to the CO2 recyclers, you apply electric power on them, and then you get back some, you produce formic acid or carbon monoxide and stuff. Now, an important thing, as I showed you, this compactness, because it's compact, you can actually fit in many different areas. And that's why most of the companies or startups we are working at, they are actually planning to deploy them in most of the heavy industries around in California mostly, and they're talking to them. And one reason why they're so hopeful about deploying these technologies is that because these are actually, this is kind of like a stack this big, and as long as you can feed a gas separator in that factory, you can actually put a CO2 recycler right there. So in terms of volume, it's not a big problem, and that's one beautiful thing about these electrochemical devices. Very compact. Now, I'd like to finish this technical part just by differentiating two major air capture or carbon capture technologies. So one is the direct air capture, which you will probably hear about a lot. What it does is that it's basically a lot of fans you'll see in the ground. It sucks in air. There's like fans, they rotate. It sucks in air, like from air, like atmosphere. Separates the carbon dioxide, again using those gas separators I showed you, okay, and then stores the carbon dioxide somewhere. Most likely, in most of the existing technologies, they store it in the caustic soda, that KOH I showed you, the highly alkaline solution. This direct air capture is actually used to clean up the cities. For example, think about New York or LA, where the carbon dioxide ppm is really high, and you want to clean up the air. So that's where the direct air capture comes into play. So direct air capture that's why it's called direct air capture, because you capture the air from atmosphere itself. Now, these electrochemical systems are sometimes called the point source capture, because they capture the carbon dioxide coming from point sources of emission, like coal power plants or natural gas plants or something, where a lot of CO2 comes through one tailpipe. It's not scattered or something. And one beautiful thing about the electrochemical carbon capture is that we can capture carbon dioxide at a much faster rate than direct air capture. But it's not a comparison of technologies. It's basically two types of carbon capture technologies to be used for two different purposes. One to clean up the cities, and another one to clean up the heavy industries. As I showed, we can go up to like 40 kilograms an hour per stack. So which is very impressive. Now, this is going to be my last slide. Oh, the second last slide is that how does it fit into our clean or green vision? Is that if you think about in our evolution in science and technology, and if you try to think about how clean they are, right? Then we started at the Industrial Revolution with the steam engine, which were not very efficient and super dirty. And then we developed into like a better versions of combustion engines. And then we developed like better engines, like diesel engines that Bosch developed, and then jet engines. So all these combustion systems, with time, we progressed in increasingly higher efficiencies. Like the efficiency became higher and higher, and they polluted lower and lower, but still they polluted, right? So this is a class of energy conversion devices in the combustion engines. All of them have similar principles. They vary in design. Now, with the invent of the semiconductor revolution, then I'd say we entered a different stage of the science and technology. Whereas that we developed, for example, photovoltaics, the solar cells, right? That are clean. Now, it's not completely clean, because to produce those solar cells, you have carbon dioxide emissions. But the energy conversion itself doesn't have any emissions. So that's why they're very clean. And then we developed lithium-ion batteries around 1990s, right? Then we developed fuel cells around late 2000s, around 2005, 2006, 2007. Then we developed electrolyzers around 2014, 2013. I mean, the commercial fuel cell, commercial electrolyzers. Now, all these technologies, to produce them, you have some emissions, carbon dioxide, but their operations are very clean, right? They do not emit any carbon dioxide themselves. So this is where we stand now. Now, in the future, sometime in the future, we don't really know when, we'll probably be able to make all the devices, or we'll be able to make the whole ecosystem clean, like even the steel factories, cement factories, or something, like all these heavy industries, we'll probably be able to make them clean, non-emitting at all. But that future is not in the near zone. Like, we don't really see them to happen in the next 20 or 30 years or so. Maybe in some developed countries, we will probably see some changes, but in the developing nations, no, it's not. They're not going to be economically viable. Carbon capture is actually the buffer in that transition. So we stand at some places where we have some clean energy conversion technologies. We want to go to a future where we'll have all clean energy conversion technologies. But on the way, carbon capture will act as a buffer for those technologies which are not clean, but they're essential, like steel manufacturing, cement manufacturing, ammonia manufacturing, industries like that, maybe some natural gas power plants as well. So these carbon capture, and most likely the electrochemical carbon capture, the CO2 recyclers, fit exactly in this domain. So I hope I was able to give you like an idea of where this particular technology stands in the overall decarbonization game. So now my last slide, it is just, well, I'll probably stop for a few questions.
Great, we've got a couple questions. A few people would like to know, what are the practical uses for the carbon monoxide and the formic acid that you've been speaking of?
I'm not a very good person to answer that because I'm not a chemist, I'm an applied physicist. But I can tell about formic acid. So formic acid is used in the food processing industry a lot, because if you acidify it a little bit higher, then you produce acetic acid, which is vinegar, which is used in a lot. You can also produce aldehydes from formic acid that are used for food processing. I think aldehydes are also used as some form of preserving materials, right? So if you want to preserve something. Those are, I think, the two big application areas for formic acid. Carbon monoxide, as you probably know, carbon monoxide is highly reactive. And carbon monoxide, that's why it's very dangerous. Carbon monoxide is actually used for flue gas for many industrial purposes. One thing for example, I know, it's in fertilizer industry, I forgot where. I forgot exactly, but in fertilizer industry, it's used as a flue gas. It has a lot of application. But unfortunately, I'm not a very good person to ask this question because I'm not a chemist, and I'm not, more precisely, I'm an organic chemist.
All right, thank you. Next question is, global shipping is hard to decarbonize. Is electrochemical carbon capture viable for ocean-going ships like container ships?
That's a very good question. That's actually an interesting question. I don't think people have thought about that idea. See, the thing is that after you use, let's say you deploy those carbon capture devices on the ships, you need to be able to store the product somewhere, right? So I guess if your ship is big enough, you may actually plan it. I don't think any of us actually have thought about it. It could be a nice idea to work on.
All right, another question. You stated that you are at a TRL 7. This means you have a functional prototype in an operational environment. What gas stream are you using and at what volumes?
So this is a technical person, huh? So the gas stream we are using is pure carbon dioxide because we are in the lab. It's ultimately a lab. So it's basically what we have is like carbon dioxide tank, carbon dioxide coming from that tank, and we mix it with water vapor. You have to mix it with water vapor for optimal performance. That's our gas stream. And on the other hand, you just have pure DI water. So if I go there, for example, here, this is the CO2 gas stream, pure CO2, and H2O. It's water on the other side. Does that answer?
Yeah. Last question for now. Do your cost analyses include the cost for the gasifier gas separator?
Yes, yes. This is a very detailed cost analysis. Our group has done it. I am not an expert on cost analysis. I understand them very well, but yes, if you take, it takes into account everything. It takes into account basically you buying all the those catalyst nanoparticles and all the way coming up with a stack and all the way making products from the stack. So it includes pressure swing absorption, all those factors in. Yes. But you see, the principal driver, I can tell you one more thing, is that the main part of this, so pressure, like this gas absorption, these are not expensive technology. The expensive part is actually the stack itself, like making the stack itself, catalyst nanoparticles. The nanoparticles are expensive. The other important aspect in this case is the electricity price. It's usually assumed that the electricity price is from the renewables, because so that it's cheaper, like about 3 cents per kilowatt hour or something. If you live in a place where you don't have any renewables, then of course these prices will go higher.
I think that's all the questions for now. Thank you.
All right. I just have one more slide left, and this is meant to be just for fun. So I just wanted to show you who the people are in this game. So interestingly, it's actually started with 2 PhDs for the dissertation projects. Tasha and Kendra, both of whom I know well, they were PhD students at Stanford, and they were actually pondering this option that if you can actually create an electrochemical device that can do this thing, capture the carbon and store it in other molecules, other chemicals that we could use. And this is fantastic, right? Because I think they finished their PhD in 2014 or 15, and since then I think after that they came up with the startup called 12. So that was, I think, it's like the earliest, the first company in this game, electrochemical carbon capture. But then other people have tagged along. So for example, Dioxide Materials, which is based in Florida, they came along. Ionomer Incorporation, they're in Canada, they came along. They actually make membranes. And after seeing the potential of it, for example, as I told you, the oil and gas companies, they have a lot of motive to use this, because at every stage of purification of the crude oil, they keep emitting carbon dioxide. And so if they want to get some carbon tax benefits or something, they can use either, for example, they can use this technology. And that's why Shell and Chevron have massive investment in this game. Most of our fundings actually come from these two companies. This is funny. Recently, the hydrogen electrolyzer companies have also started in this field. Nel, for example, is a very famous electrolyzer manufacturing company, and they came into the game. I'll also tell you the name of the direct air capture companies. The direct air capture companies have been there, I think, since about 2000, or at least the concept was there, and then so there are a lot of companies. For example, Carbon Engineering, I think one of the earliest ones. Climeworks are the earliest ones. Carbon Engineering became very famous because of, I think it was backed by the Bill Gates venture, Breakthrough Energy Ventures. A few other important companies are for example, Global Thermostat are doing pretty well. Noya are doing pretty well. Carbon Infinity here, in this Infinity sign, they are doing pretty well. And Verdox are also doing very well. Many of these companies are actually in Europe. In US, I think Carbon Engineering is in Europe. In US, Sustera is in US, and Heirloom, I think, is in US. They are in US. So it's actually spread across the continents. Whereas in the electrochemical part, most of these companies are actually in US. So yeah, it's gaining up. Its carbon capture is getting a lot of attention in the decarbonization game itself, and it's an interesting journey, and we think that it's going to be very important, because it's a very good way to capture carbon from heavy industries, the electrochemical. So that's it. Thanks for listening. I'm very happy that I was able to share some of the enthusiasm about this new technology to you, because you are interested in renewables in general. And if you want to email me, these are my emails. That's my LinkedIn. Feel free to ask any questions you want. That's it.
All right, we'll take any last questions for Dr. Saha. wait a minute or two for people to populate them. I'll take the time to thank you, Prantik, for your presentation and all your points of view, and remind everyone about our barbecue on Saturday. And hopefully we'll see many new faces there. We got a question. Prantik, you mentioned that the biggest cost is in the nanostack. How realistic is it to hope for much reduced cost of those or advancements in this area?
Yeah. How to do this? So the cost of making nanoparticles is going down over the years. So when you ask this question, like how to do this, well, so nanoparticles is one of the costs. There are also like electricity price is one. But one way of developing, see, the reason for high cost of production of nanoparticles is that you have to use some sort of pyrolysis to make those nanoparticles. Like you make carbon black, for example, from wood or charcoal or something like that. Now, pyrolysis itself is a very complex, is an expensive technology now. So the fact that nanoparticles are expensive because pyrolysis is expensive. Another way to make nanoparticles is something called a chemical separation process, where you go through a lot of chemical steps. That is expensive. So if you want to bring down the cost of nanoparticles, catalyst nanoparticles in general, I guess the easiest way to do it is to be able to pyrolyze them in a cheaper way, as far as I understand. I'm not from the catalysis side, so I don't have the knowledge to go too deep into this, but from my understanding, the expensive pyrolysis is the reason. Another reason is that not many big companies are actually in this game. Cost also depends on at like what scale you are making. For example, one Japanese company, TKK, Tanaka Precious Metals, they are in this game for some time. Sigma Aldrich is in some. There are like 2 or 3 big companies, right? And I think it's one of the reasons why it's so expensive, because we are not making it in big enough quantities. I think that's one of the reasons as well.
Thank you. Someone else asked, how many million tons per year of carbon dioxide do you think this system could capture when mature?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a reason why I avoided that analysis deliberately. And the reason is that, you see, as a scientist, I can only give you that like an individual stack result, right? Like, so we can make a stack, and we know that this is stable for 1,000 hours of operation, and this is what one stack can do. It can capture 40 kilograms per hour, or like if you like, let's say 8 kilograms per hour. Now, how much carbon dioxide can it in the global scale? That I cannot say, because I don't know how many of these stacks you are deploying, right? Like if you have 100 stacks operational in US right now, then like 40 times 10 or 40 times 100, that kilogram per hour of carbon dioxide can be captured. The more you go, the higher you can do, the higher you can capture carbon dioxide. And that's why sometimes people give that estimate, but I didn't want to give people any estimate that I am not sure about. So I can just give you at the engineering level that this is the capability. The more you deploy it, the more you can suck carbon dioxide out.
I think on that note, we're going to end it here. Feel free to email Dr. Saha with more of your questions, come up with more later tonight. And thank you all.
Thank you very much, guys, and thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.